Okay, Assalamualaikum. Because my alarm clock didn't work that well as I wanted to, I was late for this morning for the panel, which I really had to speak on. But frankly, I can speak now. I'm going to talk about Islamic democracy in a way that follows up on the discussion we had before the coffee break. Like I said before, I said on Friday, I'm also working together with the Dutch Muslim Party. It's a political party that we started in Holland. The persons who started it were mostly converts. And what we tried to do here in Holland, the same bit here like in England, the immigrant groups belong to the lower social classes. They're not the doctors, they're not the lawyers. They're the guys who all worked in the factories, and they came in the 1950s, 60s. You have these old videos, for example, you see these Dutch ambassadors getting the immigrants from Morocco, from Turkey, checking their teeth, checking their muscles, see if they can speak French or a little bit English. It's scary to see how much it resembled slavery. And they got here, and the idea was, oh, they can work for 2 years here, for 5 years. But in the end, they started living here because they couldn't go back because Morocco didn't have anything for them. So now they have children here. Now you already have the third and the fourth generation living here. And we all know about the problems of Geert Wilders. He was the third largest party who won in Holland. I'm going to discuss later on that panel, the media panel. But partially why we started the Dutch Muslim Party was because of the integration problem. And the persons who created it was about 2 years ago. And about 6 months ago I joined the movement. And they wanted my help to create a viable theory that Islam and democracy, or that a minority Muslim group can not only participate in democracy, for example by voting, but even form a party to be part of the system. Because of course we all know, we heard things, oh, you cannot be part of the kafir system, or we just heard, for example, religion and democracy are two opposites, which I know is a theory of Pervez, and he created that theory as a Pakistani where democracy was enforced by Britain. He has his own context how he created that theory. So I started researching, and I always had the idea Islam and democracy, that the Quran promotes democracy, shura, so I never saw a problem. But now we had a different problem. Now we had the idea, okay, but indeed, must God rule, like Laif was pointing out, you have to have the hukam Allah, you have the rule of Allah in the country. So can we accept secular law, or neutral law, if I rather call it? So first I started to look at the Quran about democracy, laws, how it all worked, but I started the wrong way. And this is how the previous discussion ended, is first define secularism. So that's the main problem here. Tariq Ramadan, although I'm not a great fan of his work, because in the end he just gives new paints to the old car, so it still doesn't drive. What he does, one good observation he makes, is that in the Middle East, or at least for Muslims, as people who knew colonialism, is that in Europe, in the West, for us, democracy, secular democracy, was a way out of the religious wars between the Christian groups. So in the West, they see democracy as, you have democracy, secularism, means freedom of religion. But in the Middle East, it happened all differently. For them, is you have a colonial ruler who oppresses you, is there without the right being there. They enforce democracy, they enforce secularism, because they think de-Islamicizing the country, the people, means freedom of religion and freedom of the people, and then they will be like the West. But then, what do most Muslim countries ended up with? Dictators, who enforce French secular law. Saddam Hussein. In most countries, it was secular law that ruled already there. In Iran, it was secular law who ruled there before Khomeini took over. And it's interesting that in almost all other countries, from Egypt or all Muslim countries, Pakistan, they all use European law system, secular law system to interpret the Sharia. They don't even use usul al-fiqh anymore, the old system. They use the names, they use the terms, but the way they interpreted Islamic law is deterministic. In the old system, in usul al-fiqh, it was never before that one school of law ruled over the land. It only happened once with the Ottomans, where they enforced Hanifa law, meaning that all the qadis, all the judges were from the Hanifa school. Before that, they always chose, in that kind of way the Abbasids and Umayyads were a bit secular, they always chose the judges from all groups, from all sects, to make sure that there was a sort of balance. This was one of the only good things they did as rulers. So for me the first thing was define secularism. When you look at France and Turkey, they were the two most main examples Muslims know because of the laïcité, the really present secularism in their country. In secularism you have two terms. You have secularism of the government and you have secularization of society. Those are two different things. Because a secular government means it's neutral, it's unbiased. It doesn't mean it's not inspired or influenced by religion. Because, like I said before, every country is influenced by people and the people are influenced by religion. So you can never have a neutral government. It's impossible. So yeah, and in the West, in Holland, for example, and in France and all the others, although they are hate, they try to separate Christianity from, still it's based on Christian values. So you cannot escape religion in that kind of way. You never have secularism for 100%. What happened in France, they created secularism to get rid of the Catholic institution that enforced the emperor, monarchy, whatever you like. So their secularism was a bit like how the Americans hate the British, is to get rid of the oppressor. In Holland, secularism developed in a completely different form. You had the Protestants and the Catholics living in the south of Holland, the Protestants mostly living in the north. And these two were fighting each other. They didn't, for a long time, Catholics were banned. After the Protestants won the 80-year war in Holland, Holland's the only country who resisted the Inquisition, who fought an 80-year war to get rid of the Inquisition of the Catholics. After they won that war, what did they do? They created their own Inquisition in Holland. Catholics were not allowed. In Amsterdam, you have these beautiful inside churches, what we call them. So from the outside, it looks like a house. So when you get inside, boom, Jesus everywhere. There's a Catholic church. It's like with the Jews hiding during World War II. That's how the Catholics did. You couldn't be open Catholics. You still have beautiful castles where you have little secret rooms where they were secret Catholics. So you have this little secret lock. The door opens, and you get this beautiful small church hidden inside the house. That's what happened in Holland. No freedom. So this lingered on till around 1750. And because of the fall of Andalusia, of Muslim Spain, a lot of Jews came into Amsterdam. But they had no right to be part of the government. They had no right in voting. The Catholics had no right to say anything in The Hague, the main parliament. And a lot of people, of course, were protesting against this. So after all, they had to create, how can we create a fair balance? So in Holland, they created a form of secularism that was to protect religion. Not to define it, not to put it away out of the society. So in Holland, we have secular government, but you don't have secularization. In a sense, I rather call it democratic pluralism than really secularization of secularism like it is in France. And our laws, of course, they're not based on the Bible, but they're inspired by its values. We always, in Holland, on TV, we always talk about the politicians about norms, values, morality, and that they're all, and most people in Holland, they're agnostic, they're not really atheists, most of them are agnostic, but they all acknowledge Christian values as good. They denounce the institution, but they do not denounce the values, the morality behind it. My parents were Catholic, but they were not really religious Catholics. They still sent me to Christian school. And they always said to me, not because of the theology, but because of the values they give to you. And even now, still, Christian elementary schools, kindergarten schools, are the most popular in Holland, although 80%, even 60 to 80% of the parents who send their children there are not Christian or not open Christian, don't go to church. And for me, so when I started to research this, it became really interesting because I saw a real overlap with how the Quran tries to bring values to society. Because it says, do everything through shura. But at the same time, the Quran, when you look at those verses, chapter 42, chapter Shura, verse 38, it says, they're amr, they're things of authority. They rule with shura bainahum. Shura bainahum, they do it together with democracy. But then the verses after it, you can really immediately see, and the people who are oppressed, they defend themselves. So you can see when you talk about democracy rule by majority, the Quran already says but people when they're oppressed they have to defend themselves. It doesn't talk to believers, it talks to people. So it already implies you have to have minority rights. Minorities have the right to defend themselves. So I started to see, okay, how can I create a theory to show that Muslims, that even the Dutch system of democracy, the pluralistic democracy, is one of the best and also coincides with the Quranic idea of a society. But without making it apologetic, because that's one of the main concerns in Islamic reform. How can we show Islamic reform without being apologetic? Without like Tariq Ramadan saying, oh no, Hashim Kamali from Malaysia who wrote beautiful books in Sharia. No, you have equality in Sharia law. No, you ignore half of it. It's not about equality. So for me that was the biggest challenge. And when I look at the Quran, I looked at a verse, chapter 3, verse 64, when it says to the Al-Kitab, the people of the book, so everyone who received religion. But I also see that verse in a bit, I think it's more about the people who are influenced by religions. Because the people in Holland for themselves, they don't really believe, they're agnostic, but they still follow Christian values. So can we say they're not Al-Kitab in that kind of way? And when you look at that verse, it says, let's come to a common word, a common statement. Kalimitan sawa'in. And sawa means an equal statement, something that's an equal level. And first it says, let's only serve God together. And a lot of people still think that this is only a theological statement, but like Perez pointed out in his studies, and also some people here, it also refers to the freedom. Even Maududi said it, who's one of the proponents of the greatest oppression systems in the world in his Islamic theory, still says it's ruled by God. And we all have different ideas of what rule by God is. But then you see the next part of that verse, where it says the agreement between Christian, the Al-Kitab, people who are of other religions and the Muslims, that they do not take each other as lords, arbaban. And normally this statement is always understood as, again, in a religious context, that they do not take the priest as lords, so you don't commit shirk, you don't commit polytheism. But the religious verse was already before. So what does this idea of not taking each other as lords mean? If you look at the story of Pharaoh, what does he say? I am your Rabb. I am your Lord. I'm your controller. So when I read that verse 364 about that we not take each other as lords, I link it to what the Pharaoh says. It means Muslims cannot rule Christians. Christians cannot rule Muslims. But still you have to have shura. Still you have to have common agreements. So in that kind of way, the Quran doesn't promote secularism in the French style, but in the sense of democratic pluralism. If you look at chapter 4, verse 58, it says, give the al-amanat, the trust, the government, like I said was before, amina means trust, security, peace. It means you have no fear, you trust something. And you give it to the people who own it, you give it to the people who deserve it. And then the same verse says, and rule with adl. When you use hukm, you use adl. Adl means not just justice. The Quran uses two words for justice, qist and adl. Qist means one-sided justice. Even though he hates me, still I try to treat him fairly. When you look at adl, it means two-sided justice. It means we're both treat each other equally. It means being unbiased is even one of the meanings of that word. So it's interesting that it says, give the government to the people who deserve it, the people who are not biased. And again, it gives a theory of a sort of secularism, a neutral government. So I had the theory from the Quran, I started to build it up. Even when I looked at the Constitution of Holland, I saw that most of the ideas of the Quran were in it. Freedom of speech, freedom of law, freedom of life, everything, all those things. The only things that, for example, differ with law in Holland is inheritance, other things, and even that you have a lot of great scholars like Muhammad Shaur and Adib Sadir that show that the traditional understanding of those verses are not always correct. So I think when a lot of Dutch Muslims say to me, yeah, but we have to have Sharia law, and I'm like, you don't understand how law always worked in Muslim society. No society ever had Sharia law. They only had fiqh. Fiqh is try to understand Sharia law. It's all, and even the earliest scholars of fiqh, they were always honest. They always say, it's us who try to understand the law. It's never God. You can never say, this is God's law. You can only say, this is our human understanding of God's law. So it's always interesting when they say, we want God to rule. And so, which is impossible. It's always us who rule. It's always us who decide how to interpret things, to give the limits to society. God can only show the direction of what he wants. And so I had for this, I'm still working on a book now in Dutch and also try to write it in English about this theory, how to work this out. Because in a sense, it coincides what Lightfoot's saying, what the Deep is saying, what also Faradun is saying. And of course I'm going to take in Faradun's sentence, I have the right to go to hell, and I'm going to put that in there. And then I still have to quote John Stuart Mills, and because I agree, of course, that the thing is, his ideas on paper were not his ideas in life. But still, I love his ideas on paper, so I'm going to ignore his life. Because he said, the freedom of my fist ends where your face begins. And that's, for me, is one of them. That is the rule. That's the whole theory, the philosophy of law. Is when, and that's what the Quran also says. The Quranic hudud, the laws, are only focused on when society is endangered, is getting in chaos. That's why the Quran always focuses on fasad fil al-ard, on chaos on earth, because that's the only thing that it wants. It wants order so people can be free, because you need order to have freedom, and that's what the Quran focuses on. And I had, again, like I said before, I had the theory from the Quran. Then I looked at the historical, because that's what most Muslims refer to. Or you can back it up from the Quran, but can you back it up from the Sunnah, from the practice of the Sahaba of the Prophet? And then when I looked at that practice, you can see that even with Omar in his Shura Council, he allowed Christians and Jews to have a say in it. And that is really, for me then, when I started to read this, that was so interesting. Even Ali, when he was in Kufa, he lost his harness. He left it at his horse. When he was walking through the city, he saw a Christian guy wearing his harness. And he was like, oh, that's my harness. So he grabbed the guy, took him to the judge of the military camp, of the Muslim camp, and shoved the guy in front of him. That's my harness, making sure he gives it back. And so he asked Ali, Khalifa Ali, do you have a proof it is your harness? And Ali said, yeah, I recognize it. Do you have any witnesses? He says, no. Do you have witnesses the guy stole it? No. Then he asked the Christian guy, is it your harness? And the Christian guy said, I'm wearing it. And the judge said, Ali, I take your word, but rule of law. You have to be honest, being unbiased. So he let the Christian guy go with the harness. That was the early Muslim society, that even the Khalif lost from a Christian. He knew it was his harness. People knew it was Ali's harness, but he had no witnesses for the thing. So the Christian guy got the harness. That was the early society, and that's, I think, the idea that democracy is the opposite of religion. I think you first have to redefine democracy and religion for yourself, and don't just follow Perez's ideas, because Perez had a different context, different time. Same as Maududi. Same with the word secularism. What secularism you're focusing on? The secularism of the Shah was different from the secularism in Turkey, or in Holland, or in Germany, or in England, or in France. First define what you want. For me, that's why I started to use, I discussed it also with Farouk, that the word secularism for Muslims have a bad taste. You know, why? Because we link it to oppression, not to freedom. Western people link it to freedom. So that's why I think we have to redefine the words, give them a new definition, or just use a new word that shows the definition, like I use democratic pluralism in my books instead of secularism. I do say that secularism is the next stage of democratic pluralism, but I try to avoid the word. And in that kind of way, Muslims now are accepting it, and they see the logic behind it, because they want freedom. That's what the focus they have.
So you're always looking at me.
Yeah?
Is there a reason?
Yeah, you're in front of me. Okay, but I hope it was interesting or helpful a little bit.
It was.
Okay.